Step out of the vehicle. Now.
Sir, am I being detained for a crime, or is this a voluntary checkpoint contact?
Don't play lawyer with me. You people always have an attitude.
I am a lawyer, and you just said the quiet part out loud on your own camera.
At exactly 9:17 p.m., on a long, dim stretch of highway outside the town of Redfield, a checkpoint that should have lasted under 90 seconds turned into a 28-minute confrontation that would destroy one trooper's career. What started as a routine license and registration contact quickly became something else entirely, a test of ego, a test of power, and a test of whether the law meant the same thing to everyone. And the reason it exploded wasn't because the driver was reckless, intoxicated, or combative. It was because the driver didn't do what this trooper expected him to do. The driver was a 39-year-old black male, calm voice, clean car, perfectly valid documents, and a military bearing that doesn't come from pretending. He was a United States Army colonel, and he spent his working life teaching people how to follow rules under pressure. The trooper didn't know that yet, but he was about to learn it in the worst possible way. Before we get into it, do me a favor and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because the middle of this story is where the whole thing flips. And you're going to want to hear exactly what the colonel says when the trooper finally realizes who he's messing with. The man behind the wheel was Colonel Marcus Reed, and he wasn't your average 39-year-old. Most people at 39 are just trying to keep their life organized. Work, family, bills, and maybe a vacation they never take. Marcus Reed was different. Even off duty, he carried himself like the day still had a mission. He'd been in the Army for 17 years. He'd deployed twice overseas. He'd done the kind of jobs where a single mistake could ruin lives, not just paperwork. And in the last phase of his career, he'd moved into a role that made him even sharper. He served in the JAG Corps, the legal branch of the military. He wasn't just a colonel. He was a military attorney who dealt with investigations, constitutional standards, and procedures that could end careers when people got sloppy. Friends described him as quiet but impossible to intimidate. The kind of person who doesn't argue louder. He argues cleaner. And because of his work, he had a habit most people don't. When authority spoke, he didn't automatically assume authority was right. He assumed authority had to explain itself. That night, he was doing something painfully normal. He was driving home. Earlier, he'd visited his mother at a rehab facility 2 counties away. She'd had a knee replacement and a rough recovery. He stayed longer than planned because she asked him to, and because he was her son, and even colonels still answer to their mothers. The sun had been down for hours by the time he got on the interstate. The air was cold and sharp. The highway was mostly empty, but not quiet. Big rigs passing like rolling thunder, headlights sweeping across the asphalt, and that steady hum you only notice when you turn the radio off. Marcus drove without rushing. He wasn't weaving. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was simply following the rules exactly as written, the way he'd trained people to do his entire adult life. And then he saw the lights, a checkpoint. Cones narrowed traffic into a single lane. Floodlights cast hard white beams across the road. A line of cars slowed, inching forward toward uniformed troopers who leaned into windows, asked a few questions, waved some drivers through, and pulled others aside. Marcus didn't panic, but his mind did what it always did in a controlled environment. It assessed. He knew checkpoints could be lawful under certain conditions. He also knew they were often misused. He'd read the case law. He'd taught briefings about it. And he'd seen, firsthand, how quickly routine can turn into targeted when a person in uniform decides they don't like what they see. His heart didn't race with fear. It raced with awareness. When it was his turn, a trooper stepped to his window. White male, late 30s or early 40s, thick neck, confident posture that leaned slightly too close to the glass. Name tag, Trooper Harlan. The body camera on his chest faced Marcus like a little black eye. Trooper Harlan didn't greet him. He didn't say, "Good evening." He went straight to commands. License and registration. Marcus nodded once, calm. "Certainly. Before I reach, officer, can you tell me what the checkpoint is for tonight?" Harlan's eyes narrowed like the question itself was disrespect. "Just give me your license and registration." Marcus didn't argue. He moved slowly, deliberately, narrating his movements. "My wallet is in my left pocket. My registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now." He handed them over. Harlan looked at the license. The floodlight caught the photo, then the name, then the address. For a moment, Marcus thought it might be routine after all. Then Harlan's expression shifted. Not confusion, not concern. Something closer to irritation, like the sight of Marcus behind the wheel didn't match the picture in his head of who belonged in a car like this, at this time of night, on this road. Harlan leaned in again. "Where are you coming from?" "Visiting family," Marcus replied. "Where?" "A rehab facility in Benton County." "For what?" "My mother's recovery." Harlan didn't acknowledge it. He asked another question, faster. Where are you going? Home. Where's home? Marcus paused just a fraction. Officer, I'm happy to comply with checkpoint procedures, but I'd like to understand. Am I being detained for anything beyond the checkpoint? Harlan's jaw tightened. You're being detained because you're at my checkpoint. Marcus kept his voice even. Understood. Then I'll comply with the checkpoint. Are you checking for licenses and sobriety tonight? Harlan's eyes flicked, like Marcus had said something he wasn't supposed to know. Step out of the vehicle. That was the moment the entire encounter turned. Marcus did not raise his voice. He didn't get emotional. He did what professionals do when something becomes irregular. He asked for the basis. Officer, what is the lawful reason you're ordering me out? Have you observed a violation, or are you escalating beyond the checkpoint? Harlan's tone hardened. I don't need a reason. Step out. Marcus looked straight ahead for a beat, then back at him. Yes, you do. The law requires reasonable suspicion for certain actions. A checkpoint doesn't give unlimited authority. Harlan's face changed again. Now it was anger, mixed with something else. Embarrassment. Because other troopers were nearby. Cars were passing, and Marcus was calmly, politely, telling him no without actually saying no. Harlan took a half step back and motioned. Step out, now. Marcus stayed seated, hands visible on the steering wheel. I'm not refusing. I'm asking for clarification. Am I being detained? And if so, for what specific reason? Harlan's voice rose. You people always want to argue, always want to make it difficult. Marcus didn't react to the phrase the way Harlan expected. He didn't flinch. He didn't get loud. He simply locked onto it like a lawyer hearing a confession. Trooper, Marcus said, controlled. What do you mean by you people? There was a silence that felt louder than shouting. Harlan's eyes darted, and he realized he'd said something he couldn't take back. The camera was recording. Other troopers were within earshot, and Marcus had given him a chance to correct it. Harlan chose the worst option. Don't twist my words, he snapped. Step out of the car or you're going to jail. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, so you're threatening arrest? For what charge? For obstruction. Marcus's voice stayed level, almost instructional. Asking questions is not obstruction. Obstruction requires an actual act that prevents you from performing a lawful duty. You're performing a checkpoint contact right now, and I have complied with your request for identification. Harlan stepped closer again, posture big. You think you're smarter than me? Marcus met his eyes. I think the law is bigger than both of us. That line hit Harlan like an insult. Open your door. Marcus didn't move. Officer, if you believe I am legally required to exit, articulate the legal reason. I'm not reaching, I'm not threatening, I'm not intoxicated, and you haven't alleged any traffic violation. You're escalating based on my questions. Harlan's face flushed. His breathing changed, shorter, heavier. The body camera captured it. And then he did what bad authority figures do when they feel exposed. He called for backup like he was calling for witnesses to his own confidence. Supervisor to my location, Harlan said into his radio, then leaned closer again. Last chance. Out now. Marcus kept both hands visible. Trooper, I'm going to comply with lawful orders. I'm not going to comply with unlawful intimidation. If you open that door, you are escalating without cause, and I will comply physically for safety, but this will be documented. Harlan's hand went to the door handle, and in that moment, Marcus made a decision that would later be replayed millions of times. He didn't fight the door. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He turned his head slightly toward the body camera and spoke clearly, like a statement for the record. I am not resisting. I do not consent to any search. I am complying under protest. Harlan yanked the door open. Step out. Marcus moved slowly, stepping out. He kept his hands where they could be seen. As he stood, the floodlight hit him fully, and for the first time, Harlan got the full picture. A man with a straight back, squared shoulders, and that unmistakable posture of someone used to command. Still, Harlan didn't back off. He stepped in close and immediately tried to take control physically, grabbing Marcus's left wrist. Marcus didn't yank away. He simply planted his feet. Trooper, do not grab me unless you are placing me under arrest. Are you placing me under arrest? Harlan's mouth tightened. Put your hands behind your back. Marcus didn't move yet. For what charge? For obstruction. Marcus nodded once. Understood. Then I am under arrest. I will comply. But for the record, you have no probable cause for obstruction. This arrest will not stand. Harlan forced his arms back and cuffed him with a bit more pressure than necessary. Not enough to be dramatic. Enough to be petty. The camera caught Marcus's face. Calm. Eyes forward. No panic. No anger. Just that quiet expression of someone already thinking 5 steps ahead. Harlan walked him to the side of the road, away from the lane of cars. Another trooper stood nearby, watching, uncertain, like he could sense something wasn't right, but didn't know where to put his hands in the situation. Harlan started his next move, the one that turns a checkpoint into fishing. "We're going to search your vehicle." Marcus's response was immediate, clear, and devastating. "No, you're not. I do not consent. And you do not have probable cause." Harlan scoffed. "I don't need it. You're under arrest. We can search incident to arrest." Marcus turned his head slightly, still calm. A search incident to arrest is limited, and in this state, it does not automatically authorize a full vehicle search unless you have reason to believe evidence of the crime of arrest is in the vehicle, or the arrestee can access the vehicle. I'm handcuffed and away from it, and obstruction has no physical evidence inside my glove box. Harlan blinked. You could see it. That tiny moment where the trooper realized the driver knew the rules better than he did. But instead of backing down, Harlan doubled down. "You're not going to tell me my job," he snapped. Marcus didn't change his tone. "Then do your job correctly." That's when Harlan made the biggest mistake of the night. He decided to humiliate Marcus, to reassert dominance not with law, but with theater. He raised his voice so other troopers could hear. "What, you think you're some kind of important person?" Marcus looked at him. "I'm a citizen exercising my rights." Harlan leaned in, lower voice now, bitter. "Yeah? You don't look like the kind of person who drives a car like this and asks these kinds of questions." Marcus's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in focus. "Trooper," he said, "repeat that statement for your body camera." Harlan froze. That right there was the pivot, the turning point. Because now it wasn't just a confrontation. Now it was an evidentiary record. Harlan tried to laugh it off. "Whatever. I'm calling my supervisor." Marcus nodded. "Good." A few minutes later, a supervisor arrived, Sergeant Valerie Donahue. She stepped into the floodlight with a different posture than Harlan, not puffed up, alert. The kind of person who understands that when someone calls for a supervisor, it can be routine, or it can be the beginning of a complaint. Donahue looked at Marcus in cuffs. "What's going on?" Harlan spoke first, fast, defensive. "He's obstructing, refused to step out, gave me attitude. I'm going to search the vehicle." Donahue turned to Marcus. "Sir, what happened from your perspective?" Marcus's voice stayed calm. "Sergeant, I complied with the checkpoint request for identification. I asked what the checkpoint was for." Trooper Harlan escalated to an exit order without articulating any lawful basis. When I asked for clarification, he threatened arrest for obstruction. He then arrested me. I have not resisted. I do not consent to any search. And I am requesting that you review his body camera footage immediately. Donahue's face tightened slightly. Not anger, concern. She looked at Harlan. "Why did you order him out?" Harlan's answer was weak. "Because he was acting suspicious." Donahue didn't let it slide. "Suspicious how?" "He was argumentative." Donahue's eyes narrowed. "Argumentative isn't reasonable suspicion." Harlan's face flushed again. He tried another angle. "He wouldn't answer questions." Donahue looked at Marcus. "Did you refuse to answer?" Marcus replied, "I answered the basic ones and then asked whether the questions were part of the checkpoint purpose. A checkpoint is limited in scope." Donahue exhaled, a slow breath. She turned slightly, looked at the other troopers, then back at Harlan. "Do you have any evidence of impairment, odor, slurred speech, open container?" Harlan hesitated. "No." "Any traffic violation?" "No." "Any contraband in plain view?" "No." Donahue's jaw tightened. "Then why are we here, trooper?" Harlan's eyes flicked to Marcus like it was Marcus's fault for existing. Marcus spoke again, still calm, but now with a weight behind his words. "Sergeant, I'm going to identify myself for you, because this has gone far enough. My name is Marcus Reed. I am a United States Army colonel assigned to the Regional Base Legal Office. I am also a licensed attorney. I am requesting immediate release or immediate articulation of probable cause for this arrest. And I am requesting your badge number and a formal complaint form." The air changed. You could see it in Donahue's posture. The way her shoulders squared, not with aggression, but with seriousness. The way she glanced at Harlan with a look that said, quietly, "What did you do?" Harlan's eyes widened just a fraction, the first crack in his certainty. "You're a colonel?" he said, like the word tasted wrong. Marcus nodded. "Yes." Donahue asked, "Are you armed, Colonel?" Marcus answered smoothly. "No, Sergeant. I am off duty, and my vehicle contains no weapons." Donahue turned to Harlan, voice low now, controlled. "Uncuff him." Harlan stiffened. "Sergeant," Donahue cut him off. "Uncuff him." Harlan didn't move fast. He lingered in that stubborn zone where pride fights orders. Then he stepped behind Marcus and removed the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists once, not dramatically, just enough to remind the camera and the world that it happened. Donahue looked him in the eyes. "Colonel Reed," I apologize for the inconvenience. You are free to go. Marcus didn't move yet. He didn't gloat. He didn't threaten. He did something far more dangerous to bad behavior. He documented. Sergeant, Marcus said, I appreciate your professionalism. I am requesting a copy of all body camera footage, dash camera footage, and checkpoint operational plan documentation for tonight. I am also requesting the names and badge numbers of all officers involved in this contact. Donahue blinked. Sir, we can provide information through records request. Marcus nodded. I will be submitting one. Additionally, I want to be clear. Trooper Harlan made statements that indicate bias. I asked him to repeat one for his body camera, and he froze. I would like you to review his audio immediately. Harlan snapped, That's not what happened. Marcus looked at him, calm as steel. Then the footage will clear you. Donahue's eyes went to Harlan again. Trooper, step back. Harlan's face tightened. He stepped back, but he was still talking, still trying to win the moment. This is ridiculous, he muttered loudly enough to be heard. He thinks he's above the law. Marcus didn't react emotionally. He corrected the statement like a professor correcting a student. No, Marcus said. I'm insisting the law applies equally. That's the entire point. Donahue escorted Marcus a few steps away from the chaos toward his vehicle. Colonel, again, I apologize. Marcus nodded. Sergeant, I understand checkpoints are stressful. But this wasn't stress. This was targeted escalation. It's a liability for your agency, and it's dangerous for the public. Donahue's face showed she couldn't disagree. Marcus got back into his car. Before he drove off, he looked one last time toward Harlan's body camera and spoke clearly. For the record, I complied. I did not resist. I was arrested without cause. This matter will be addressed through official channels. Then he drove away. Most people would go home shaking, angry, or relieved it was over. Marcus Reed was not most people. When he got home, he didn't just complain to friends. He didn't just post online. He did what a military attorney does when something is wrong. He built a case. He sat at his kitchen table, still in his jacket, and wrote a complaint like it was a legal filing. Timeline, exact language, quotes, observations, and a formal request for preservation of evidence. He referenced state policy. He referenced constitutional limits on checkpoints. He requested internal affairs review, and he sent it not just to the state police. He sent copies to the governor's office, the state attorney general, and the civilian oversight board. His complaint wasn't emotional, it was surgical, and it landed like a bomb. The state police received it Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, less than 48 hours later, Trooper Harlan was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That speed was not normal. These processes usually take weeks just to open a case. But Marcus's complaint was so detailed and the potential liability so obvious that command staff couldn't pretend it was ambiguous. Investigators pulled the footage, not just Harlan's camera, but every camera within range. They watched it once, then again. Then they called in a legal advisor. Then they called in a training sergeant. Because it wasn't just the arrest. It was the language, the escalation, the misuse of authority, the failure to articulate reasonable suspicion, the threat of obstruction as a punishment for questions, the attempt to justify a search without probable cause, the way he spoke about you people, then tried to deny it. And then there was the moment that sealed it. Investigators heard Harlan's comment about Marcus not looking like the kind of person who drives a car like this. They heard the pause, the awkward silence after Marcus asked him to repeat it for the body camera. They heard Harlan's tone shift from policing to judging. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern caught on tape. Do you think the agency did enough by placing him on leave that fast, or should it have been immediate termination? Let me know what you think. Behind the scenes, the investigation moved with unusual intensity. Internal Affairs interviewed the troopers at the checkpoint. Several were uncomfortable. One admitted Harlan gets hot when drivers challenge him. Another said he'd seen Harlan escalate more with certain people, but didn't want to put it in writing. That changed when they were reminded that lying in an investigation could end their careers too. Then the Oversight Board requested records. Previous complaints, use of force reports, and any patterns in traffic stops by race. When the numbers came back, Harlan's stop statistics looked different than his peers. More vehicle exits, more searches, fewer citations that actually stuck in court. And suddenly, the colonel's incident didn't look like an isolated mistake. It looked like the moment the agency could no longer ignore. Within 3 weeks, the findings were finalized. Trooper Harlan was determined to have violated multiple policies: improper detention, improper arrest articulation, conduct unbecoming, and biased policing indicators. The agency recommended termination. Harlan resigned before the termination could be finalized, likely hoping to protect his future employment. But resignation didn't erase the finding, and then the public found out. At first, the agency tried to keep the footage from being released. They cited ongoing investigation, privacy, and administrative review. But Marcus had anticipated that. He filed a formal public records request the moment his complaint was submitted, and he followed it with legal pressure when they delayed. When the footage finally hit the internet, it exploded. News outlets ran headlines about the colonel at the checkpoint. Social media shared clips of Marcus calmly dismantling Harlan's claims. Legal commentators broke down the obstruction threat and explained why questions aren't crimes. Training academies used the video as an example of what not to do. Escalation without cause, emotion-driven policing, and the dangers of bias. Some people praised Marcus for staying calm and using the system. Others criticized him for talking too much, or said he should have just complied faster. Some argued that questioning officers is risky. Others responded that rights aren't real if you can't exercise them without fear. But here's what nobody could deny. Marcus was right about the law, and the video proved it. The systemic implications were immediate. The agency announced changes, and while statements like that can be empty, these changes had specifics. They revised checkpoint procedures to limit discretionary questioning. They required supervisors on site at all checkpoints. They mandated additional bias awareness training paired with scenario-based legal instruction on detention standards. They updated reporting requirements for searches to ensure articulation is documented, not invented later. Essentially, they made their troopers take the kind of training Marcus Reed could have taught. And then, as the footage spread, something else happened. Other people came forward, not dozens, but enough to establish a pattern. Drivers who said they'd been ordered out for attitude. People who said Harlan's tone changed when he saw them. Complaints that once felt like whispers suddenly had context. It raised a question that went beyond one trooper. How many routine stops become unlawful escalations simply because a person in authority feels challenged? Now, where are they now? Colonel Marcus Reed continued his career. He didn't become a viral celebrity chasing interviews. He stayed focused. He worked with a local community group to host Know Your Rights seminars, not to antagonize police, but to educate citizens. He also consulted with a law enforcement training unit on constitutional policing procedures because he believed something simple. The public is safer when officers are trained correctly, and officers are safer when they don't let ego drive decisions. As for Trooper Harlan, he was no longer in state police. Public records showed his resignation, and sources later reported he attempted to apply to smaller departments, but faced barriers due to the documented findings and the viral footage. The uniform that once protected him from accountability no longer had the same power. Here's a question for you. If you were in Marcus's situation, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have asked questions, stayed calm, and documented? Or would you have stayed silent and just tried to get out of there as fast as possible? Because this story isn't just about a colonel and a trooper. It's about the difference between authority and accountability. It's about what happens when people assume compliance equals surrender. It's about the reality that many citizens don't know the details of their rights, and some authority figures count on that ignorance. They count on people being too scared, too tired, or too intimidated to question what's happening. But when you encounter someone like Marcus, someone trained, someone informed, someone who can stay calm while being provoked, the power dynamic shifts. The uniform doesn't automatically win. The badge doesn't automatically command submission. Knowledge becomes the equalizer. Let's address a criticism that always shows up when stories like this go viral. Some commenters said Marcus was asking for trouble. They said he should have just stepped out immediately. They said questioning an officer at night is dangerous and unpredictable. Here's the truth. Yes, there is real risk in tense encounters. Marcus knew that risk. That's why he kept his hands visible. That's why he narrated his movements. That's why he complied physically when the door opened. He didn't gamble with safety. But the fact that exercising basic rights is considered dangerous tells you everything you need to know about the problem. A lawful system cannot require silent obedience in order to avoid harm. That's not law. That's fear. So what are the takeaways here? What should people learn from this story? First, stay calm and keep your hands visible. Your tone matters, not because you need to respect misconduct, but because calm creates clarity on camera. Second, ask for the reason. You don't have to argue, but you can request articulation. What is the lawful basis is a powerful question. Third, don't consent to searches if you don't want to. Say it clearly and politely. I do not consent to any search. Consent is one of the biggest legal doors people open without realizing it. Fourth, document everything. Names, badge numbers, time, location, and the exact words used. Memory fades. Records don't. Fifth, Use official channels and be thorough. A detailed complaint with a timeline and specific requests is harder to ignore than an angry paragraph. And sixth, remember that accountability often depends on evidence. Cameras can protect citizens, and they can protect good officers too. The problem is never the camera. The problem is behavior people don't want recorded. One man, one checkpoint, 28 minutes, and an entire career collapsed. Not because of a conspiracy, not because of politics, but because everything was documented and undeniable. That's the power of composure. That's the importance of knowing your rights. That's what happens when someone tries to use authority as a weapon and runs into someone who understands the rules better than they do. Final question for you. What's one thing you learned from this story that you didn't know before? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because this story matters. Not just because of a colonel, not just because of a trooper. It matters for every person who has been pulled over and felt their stomach drop for reasons they couldn't explain. It matters for every person who has seen authority used as intimidation. It matters for every community that wants safety without bias. And it matters for every officer who wants policing to mean professionalism, not ego. Marcus Reed's story shows that you can stay calm. You can stand on principle. You can use the system the right way. And sometimes you can win. Not every story ends this way. Not every stop results in accountability. Not every complaint leads to change. But this one did. This is the story of a racist trooper who stopped a black army colonel at a highway checkpoint and made the biggest mistake of his career. But more than that, it's a story about what happens when knowledge meets power and power loses. Subscribe for more real stories of rights, accountability, and the moments that change everything. Smash that like button if you believe the law should apply equally to everyone. Share this video because people need to see how fast routine can become dangerous and how calm, informed resistance can bring it back to the truth. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Have you ever been in a similar situation? And what's one thing you learned today? This story is for educational purposes only.